I'll just give you an example, was for our billing process is I used to have to, because that was the financial part, I used to have to approve every invoice before every bill, I'd look at every bill when it came in, I'd approve every invoice when it came out. And the first coach I hired was this 90-year-old Jewish guy who, I'm Jewish, he reminded me actually of my grandfather, which is I think the reason I hired him. And also he would call me kid when I was 50 years old. So he had built 2 businesses from 0 people to 500 people, sold them both, and just in construction in New Jersey in the 60s. So he was like dealing with mobs, and he was like a tough guy. And he'd be, and I'd tell him about my process of like looking at every invoice and checking and double checking that we had all. And he's like, wow. He's like, how were you at math? I was like, oh, I was a C student. And he's like, and of the 5 years that you've been checking invoices, how many were incorrect? And I was like, maybe like 3. And he's like, why the hell are you doing this, kid?
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
Running a marketing department or agency can feel a bit like being in that Jay-Z song, right? And I got to admit, sometimes I feel overwhelmed by those 99 problems that come my way. So I appreciate the ray of sunshine, who is my next guest, who reminds us that solving problems for people is a privilege, not a burden. Here to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Rich Davis, the founder and chief creative officer at ThinkSpark. Thanks for joining us, Rich.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk.
I can't wait. Let's take a quick look at your background so people know who I'm talking to. You were a senior creative at St. John & Partners for 8 years. That's where you started your marketing journey. Then you launched your own agency, ThinkSpark, which you've been at for 19 years. In 5 years, ThinkSpark has grown its gross revenue from $600,000 to a projected $6 million for 2023. Congratulations, Rich.
Thank you.
And Rich leads a team of 15. So, Rich, give us a sense. What is your day like as founder and chief creative officer of ThinkSpark?
Well, it's a lot different now than it was probably, I think when I started in 2004, it was basically a spare bedroom and just there was the marketing world has completely changed since then. And it was just me. And now I've got a team. So a lot of it is coaching people, helping them be better. I still kind of oversee a lot of the creative work and hoping, just trying to build a company. There's now a lot of money on the line, clients' money that they're investing in. So I got to make sure that doesn't get screwed up and flushed down the toilet. So, it's been great though. It's been really enjoyable.
Well, we've got some interesting lessons from your journey. Some I hadn't heard before. We've done, over 70 of these now. I think yours will be 77 or something. And so there's some interesting lessons here. So first, we take a look at some lessons from the things you made. As I've said before, that's something I love to as a marketer. Like, we get to make things, right? I've never been like a podiatrist or actuary or did anything else, but I don't feel like they leave it the day like they made things. Like, we make things. And so here's your first lesson is from that thing you made, the agency. And you said, many of the day-to-day annoyances that inspired me to sell, I actually missed after I sold. This was a really surprising lesson. So I'll let you tell the story, but you sold the agency, you came back. I thought there was going to be a very different lesson, but I want to read that again because that's really profound. Many of the day-to-day annoyances that inspired me to sell, I actually missed after I sold. So how did you learn that, Rich?
So I think it even started back when I was at St. John & Partners, which I started at that agency. It was about 20 people. And there were 3 writers. One ended up quitting, one ended up getting fired. And suddenly I was like a 25-year-old as the agency grew from, a few people to over 150 and started adding these accounts. And I got to be there sort of riding the wave as one of the lead creatives. And I was about 7 or 8 years into it. And I was just starting to get annoyed with everything. I didn't have a good creative brief and that wasn't accurate. And the client had shot down one of my ideas that I put so much passion into. And I remember watching an HBO documentary on Bellevue, the mental hospital in New York. And there was a guy, he was in a straitjacket, and all he said every day was, I hate this place. I've been here for 7 years. No one listens to me. I hate this place. I've been here for 7 years. No one listens to me. I was like, oh my God, that's my story. I got to quit and do my own thing. And which actually that part was a blessing. But at the same time, like I had it pretty lucky that I was just a kid, and I was like, an integral part of this big agency that was growing and all that other stuff. And when I started my own agency, it was almost in the same time frame where someone could show up at a shoot late or something wasn't working, or again, the clients, that's always a big thing with creatives. The client shoots down your idea that you really cared about and wanted to see made. And finally I was like, you know what, I'm going to go do something else. I don't know if it's going to be like a park ranger or write screenplays or something, but I don't want to do advertising anymore. These people are crazy and, they don't like my ideas sometimes and blah, blah, blah. And so I sold the business and I sold it to someone who was actually a CEO. I won't say who it was, but they were a CEO of one of the largest companies in America who had retired and always wanted to go into marketing. And first of all, I was thinking, well, why is this super smart guy buying the business that I'm jettisoning? I mean, that maybe I'm the one making so that was like my first clue almost on the day that we closed on the business. But it turns out a small business is much, much harder to run than a large business. And he had a whole dynamic with his son who he brought into the business and they couldn't make it work. And I ended up after a year, their business at the time was failing and they asked me if I wanted it back. And in that time, I realized like all these little things, meetings that went too long or quirky personalities, like it was a privilege to be able to do the things that I got to do and make things. And sure, it might not have been like my favorite idea. They picked my second favorite, but like we are so privileged as creatives and even as marketers to do the things that we do to change people's opinion and get new products out there and all this other stuff, that there are annoyances. I found even when I was at home basically doing nothing, there are still even annoyances with that, like the can opener is not working. And there's just annoyances in life. And really what we get to do in branding and marketing is an awesome job. And as I looked at other things out there, it was just, I couldn't wait to get back. So I had an opportunity to buy it back. Now, as part of the negotiating, when they said, do you want it back? I was like, I don't know. I'm so happy doing what I'm doing now. But in my head, I was like, oh my God, I got to get this back. And it was really fortunate that I was able to get it back for close to nothing. And then that gave me the opportunity to look at it through a new lens and also do a lot of the things that I was doing that frustrated me, kind of do them in a way that I could do them a little bit better and make life a little bit easier. And that's kind of what I did.
I mean, I think that's great for anyone listening too. Like when you're frustrated with your job, right now, I'm sure everyone listening has a frustration right now to think this is something pretty cool we do. I remember I interviewed, I think it was a marketing director at Merrill, and she was talking about, I had all these deadlines and doing this and this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like on a photo shoot, like in Italy, like overlooking
Right.
like the Mediterranean, this historic naval, blah, blah, blah. And I just had to stop for a minute. I'm like, wait a minute, I actually have a kind of cool job. Like these deadlines are frustrating. This is kind of cool. But so let me ask you, so that's a rare chance almost. It's a wonderful life chance to do it all over again. Or I mean, I also kind of think of it's like the Al Pacino, every time I try to get out, they pull me back in, right? But
Right.
like you had a chance to do it over again, right? So you sold the agency, you're out, then you come back in. So let me ask, what did you do differently? Because something that you said really struck me when you talk about like leaving St. John and being frustrated. I was also at an agency, for 5 years. And I was also, frustrated every day. I mean, I loved it, frustrated every day. And then when I had a chance to leave, I thought it was going to be like a Jerry Maguire moment, right? Like it was going to be great. I was going to be so excited to like when I resigned or whatever, I was going to, who's with me? Like, let's, and what I was surprised, and then you get 2 weeks after that and stuff. And what I was surprised at was like, I was sad. I was like, man, I'm going to miss these people. I'm going to miss, that desk over there. I'm going to miss like that marker comp. I'm going to miss. And so it made me more excited. Like when I went into the next job I was going into, I kind of looked at it with fresh eyes and said, I'm going to make the most of this. Right. So for you, you left, you sold it, you came back, you had a second chance. It's a wonderful life. Every time a bell rings, all that stuff. So what did you do different the second time, Rich?
Yeah, so I'll start really quickly by saying one of the kind of like inspirational moments is someone told me about this thing called I think it's called the hedonic cantilever, which basically says we all have like this defined range of happiness. And yeah, if you win the lottery, you're going to be a little bit happier for a while. Or if someone, dies in your family, you're going to be sadder for a little while. But generally, we all stay in that kind of range. So it doesn't matter if you're, like climbing the Himalayas or the Alps, or like at a cubicle that it might vary a little bit. So I kind of went into it with fresh eyes. And also I remember there was a scene from Seinfeld where George said he just was going to do the opposite of everything. Like he was, I think, living with his parents. He didn't have a girlfriend. All this stuff was going wrong. And he's like, and things started working. So I was like, you have, it's a, a little bit of, you have to put your ego out the door. But, I decided to do almost everything in the opposite way. And I used to like to have everything my way. So I was a classic micromanager and did a lot of things that I probably didn't need to do, but they just had to be my way. And I also realized when I sold, while I got a decent price, you can actually, like, the price was less than it could have been because I was so intimately involved in every aspect of the business. So I really made it my goal, and it took a little while to even really, I didn't even know how to do that. It's like, how can I extricate myself so I'm not, so billing can go on without me, and so account management can go on without me, and certain even aspects of the creative process. And so it was all about, getting myself out of the business as much as possible. And it was hard to let go of so many things, especially, I think, for people, if you start as like a one-person business in a bedroom and you've done everything and you've had people let you down. It's hard to, do that, but it was a process, and I eventually got there. And still, but I still have work to do.
That's a great lesson for any small business owner. I think at the end we'll talk a bit about how you moved in that direction. So you talked about the hedonic cantilever. I've heard it called the hedonic treadmill, right?
Yeah,
that idea of like,
treadmill. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so you get, no matter, it's a constant treadmill. The idea is because, even if you win the lottery, you keep chasing something and try to find happiness, and the happiness
Cantilever sounds much fancier than treadmill. That's why I went with that one.
You're a smarter guy than me. That's why. But treadmill people can understand, actually.
Okay. Yes. Hedonic treadmill.
But my
Available
point is
from Peloton.
Yeah. My point is, so I think that's true, because the idea behind that is we're chasing something we can never quite get. However, I feel like when it comes to this, like, I feel like this is kind of the role I have to do. So like for you, I want to ask, like, yes, it's a hedonic treadmill, but also isn't it like you're like a smart guy and you could have probably been a successful accountant or dentist or a million different things, but also like, is there something there where it makes your soul sing to just get that concept out there to be able to make things? I mean, could you have found that fulfillment anywhere else?
No, I mean, one thing that I struggled with originally is I was thinking, like, I want to be an architect because they build buildings that like last beyond us, and you build a bridge that's there for 100 years or whatever it is. And we build sandcastles in some ways, like they're there and they're beautiful and they need to be appreciated, but then they're completely gone. And I was looking at, even when I left St. John and Partners, it's like all my life's work, 7 years, this is, gosh, now there's not even a physical tape. It's just it's a file on a server. But I was like, oh my gosh, all my 7 years is in this little portfolio case and on this like Betamax tape. That tells you how long ago it was, beta tape. And so you also have to appreciate that, and also realize, I mean, this gets really philosophical, but even those buildings and bridges all disappear. It's just a little bit longer in the grand scheme of things. So you have to appreciate the process of building, I think, and the process of making things and the privilege that it is, like I mentioned before. And then you let it go and you admire the sandcastle for however long it exists, and then it washes away and you build a new sandcastle, and you're always creating. We are lucky to be able to do that. And I also think that I realized that the great thing about being in marketing, and there's such a cycle now of stuff that it goes through, is that, gosh, there's like an ugly bridge that's going to be there and people are going to look at forever. And if you mess something up, you've got a chance to redo it sometimes like later that day. So it really is a great profession to be in. And again, it's just looking at it and appreciating the great things instead of focusing on the negative things.
Well, let's talk about what that passion means for client retention, for running an agency. You said most clients would rather have passion versus perfection. So how'd you learn that?
Well, because we never offered perfection, so I don't know that I ever had the chance to fully test that theory. But I know as an agency, especially when we were smaller and before we had all our systems and our processes worked out, we had a lot of mistakes. And, we're not perfect. We still make mistakes from time to time. And I found that clients would actually like they'd be like, oh, that's okay. Like we've had, this many go right and all this stuff, and you guys really care. And I found that as long as you're really trying, now there could be some epic failures that get you fired for sure, but for the most part, if you're showing passion and it's genuine passion for what you're doing and for the client and trying to put their interests first, that goes a long way to when there are mistakes. To the client will do that, and that's kind of guided how I hire people. I don't necessarily hire the most experienced person or the most technically adept. I mean, we have an amazing team. They're awesome. But I always look for passion as probably the single most. Is it someone who's going to care? Is it someone who gets fired up about getting things right and getting the right message out there? And I think that's made a big difference in our culture. Like we don't have to have we do have, fun dinners and things where we get together, but we don't have to have like pep rallies that you see a lot of businesses because people are just down or they're disengaged. Like when you have passionate people, that's just it's there, and I think that comes across in who we are and has helped us be successful.
And so I think there was a time where your agency made an incorrect media buy, but the client didn't even want the refund because you were so passionate. Was that?
Oh my gosh, that was amazing. I mean, that one I literally I think cried when I got that email. But yeah, we had had a media buy where someone typed in a figure wrong, and they were working till 2 a.m. every night trying to get a scramble on a rush project for a client, and we messed something up, and we were just going to eat the amount, which was going to be very significant and really like affect us in a big way. And the client said, "All right, we'd love to work with you on this. You guys have done so much stuff for us and the late hours and the weekends and all that stuff. Why don't we figure out a way that we can take the cost and we can allocate it over here and we can actually use this media that you guys got and we'll do this with it." And they really partnered with us on it, and it was incredible, and it worked out. They got a lot of ROI from it, but they could have very easily said, "Oh, look, we got free media, awesome." And we would have been totally screwed, and I wouldn't even have faulted them for that in any way because it was our mistake. And I think because we had tried so hard for them continually and built up a lot of goodwill and trust, they were willing to do that for us. And it was really like beautiful to see that they were really like our partners, and it was an amazing event.
Well, that's great. I think that's the difference between just having a transactional relationship with a client versus, like you said, them seeing the passion. You're acting in their best interest. They want to act in your best interest too. But let me ask you, so, okay, once you have the client, I mean, you've been with that client for a while, they can see you're passionate, but I know you're a passionate guy, but what about for when you're out pitching, when there's an RFP? Like, I mean, I'm sure every agency says we're passionate. What do you do to kind of show that passion? And I'll give you like an example for me. Like, I think a lot is like the language I use or the language I hear people use, right? So like I hear so much hype language in marketing. There's game-changing solutions and supercharge your website and all that stuff. And for me, I've written about copywriting and value proposition. Like I've defined copywriting as helping the customer come to the best decision about a brand, product, or conversion goal, right? And I'm sure some people are listening and they're like, that's sappy or ridiculous or pious. It's not for me. And that's great because we don't share that same passion, right? But for hopefully the people that share that same passion, when you use that right language, it works. So for you, like you're in an RFP, you're in a pitch. How do you get that passion across to a potential client?
So this is the same thing like when you're marketing for clients. So like if we're doing marketing for a hospital and we'll ask them like, what makes you different? They always say, we're caring, and they always have these, no patient is just a number. And so everyone says all that stuff, but how do you demonstrate it? Because like you said, everyone says game changing, everyone says revolutionary product. So I'll give you an example. When we were pitching, it was interesting when we were pitching Pepsi. We had an opportunity to get into a pitch for Pepsi, which was going to be I'll say it right now, a game changing thing for our agency. And so I'm sure every agency went in and said they were passionate. Well, I'll tell you, first of all, one of the agencies came in with Dasani water. They were actually drinking Dasani water, which is a Coke product. So they were eliminated without even getting a chance to pitch. So they
research the client. Wow, it's be on brand. Come on.
So they could say how passionate they are, but they're not showing it in that they didn't even focus on didn't even look at what they were bringing into the meeting. So what we did in that pitch is we actually went in and we had something called My Pepsi Story, where we showed a personal connection that we had to the brand in some way. And we've all had these interactions with brands, and so instead of just saying we were passionate, so I'll give you my example when it was my turn to talk, my Pepsi story. I actually, and this is like one of those happy coincidences, I'm a Florida Gators fan. And they are a Pepsi brand, and they invented Gatorade, which is in the Pepsi portfolio. And I actually had a couple pictures of, my daughter's first Gator game. And I guess this is me not being maybe the best parent in terms of giving your kid healthy drinks. But over that 3-hour span, I had a picture of her holding a Pepsi, and I also had one of her having a Gatorade. So I mentioned how it was this great moment, and she had never had a soft drink before, and I let her have her first one. I just wanted her to like, going to games, so she would go with me more. And so I actually have a picture of her having her first soft drink, which happened to be a Pepsi. And I showed that at the meeting and talked about, just being proud of Gatorade, being, having the Gators name, and really just demonstrating it. So that could be different things in pitches. That could be different things when you're marketing your clients or for a brand that you're representing. But you have to always show it, because we hear all these hollow catchphrases all the time, but you have to prove it somehow. So if you're carrying it, needs to be, 99% patient satisfaction, or show that in a creative way. It just can't be saying it, because it doesn't work.
And that's great. I mean, show your personal connection to the brand. Speaking of brand, though, when you were pitching Pepsi, this is one of your lessons: be true to your brand. And I like this because, everyone says that, right? Every
right.
podcast you listen to, people are going to say that. You have a great story behind it, how when you were pitching Pepsi, you stayed true to your brand, the ThinkSpark brand. And how did you do that?
So we were up, it was a 5-agency pitch. And it was 4 big agencies and us. And then I told you about the Dasani thing. So it was 3 agencies and us. So that made that was a big difference. But the agencies we were all pitching against were big agencies. With one of them was the agency of record for, I think, Samsung, Pampers. They were doing stuff for ESPN. I mean, they were massive agencies with great people, great work. And so, usually a lot of times especially before I sold, our whole goal going into pitches was how can we look as big as possible, and and come across as a big agency when we weren't. And our whole characters being the smallest big agency on earth. That's what we try and say, is we have big agency talent, but in a small agency format. And instead of like hiding from being a small agency, that's what we actually led with, is these giant agencies are great, but look at how big. I think we even had a pie chart where we showed like what they would be to a large agency, which was like this wasn't Pepsi, the entire thing. This is one little kind of small sleeve of it, is what that would be to a big agency, and then what that would mean to us. And we took a little bit of a risk saying that we didn't have 52 graphic designers. We had 2, but they were amazing, and we were going to give them tons of attention and all the passion that we had of a small agency. And that ended up with being that set us apart from all the other agencies, and that was kind of the difference maker. And we told jokes, and we showed the stuff about who would show a picture of them with their daughter having a Gatorade, but we made it personal, and we emphasized that whole thing. And it was different than they had ever seen. I think they were previously with the Pepsi, the international agency. And so we came in as a smaller local agency, and we're able to walk away with it. I always equate it to like that 16 seed in the NCAA basketball tournament beating the ones, but we beat like three or four ones. So it was really cool.
Real Cinderella story here, Rich. That's real human and great parenting story. I think we can all relate. When I took my daughter to her first Jumbo Shrimp game, I didn't even know if she knew there was a baseball game going on. We just kept going and buying her like different food.
Right.
So but she liked the game. Well, that brings up, when we talk about this lesson about being true to your brand, it's first of all, it's a great lesson for any small agency owner, any small agency listening. Hopefully that's some kind of, make them feel better. Because I know so many small agencies who tried to appear bigger to win that clientele. And I know, for example, in our AI guild, we have a lot of different consultants who also, when we first look at their advertising in the funnel, it seems like they're competing with McKinsey and Accenture, and it's like, no, you got to find your niche. You're a 1 or 2 person shop. Like focus on that niche. But what I want to ask you was, when you talk about your brand, about more of that personal brand, you talk about telling jokes and some of those things, and how you found to balance that authenticity and professionalism in your personal brand. I'll give you a quick example for us. We were on this experiment once of balancing that authenticity and professionalism, because everyone says, be authentic, right?
Right.
What does that mean? What are the limits? And so our founder, Flint McLaughlin, he moved to Montana. And he wears cowboy hats a lot up there. So anyway, he had gone into the studio up there and he had shot a video in a suit. It was normal, and then he left. And then they said, wait, you got to come back. You got to reshoot it. Something went wrong. He just had his cowboy hat on and his regular stuff. So he was like, I'm just shooting it like this, not with a suit. So long story short, turns out the first video was fine. So they had 2 videos, the same thing, tested it in the channel. So this was YouTube advertising. And actually, the professionalism video worked better. Like, I was hoping it would be the authentic one. And I think there's a good lesson there of understanding your audience. Because, for example, in our AI guild, once people are, deeper into the funnel, they know us. Yeah, Flint dresses like that. I mean, I'm wearing a t-shirt like this. But early in the funnel, like in that first YouTube advertising, you might need to do something different to pull them in. And I noticed with you, Rich, I got your headshot. You're wearing like a Patagonia sweater or something like that. I looked at marketingsherpa.com/podcast where I have them posted. My past 14 male guests all were dressed formally, all like suits or, collared shirts or something like that. The last guy that didn't was a CMO of Tractor Beverage Company, but he had a Hollywood background. He was a creative. So it comes back to that, Rich. How do you mentioned joking around, telling that personal story, but how do you balance that authenticity versus professionalism?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, it's funny because I'll talk to my team like about being true to ourselves. And then we did a Zoom call where someone's like got their washing machine in the background and they hadn't brushed their hair. So, I mean, we do still have to engage in reality a little bit. And my God, we know in marketing, like how many times have we done that sandwich for the, whatever, and we're spraying the thing. I mean, you still... Yes, I think the idea is the core. You get in as much authenticity as you can, but at the same time, it is, you are still selling to people, and you are like going out on a date, and it's different on the first date than it is after you've been dating for 2 years, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, you have to use your judgment. And I know it is disappointing. I mean, we used to do commercials for when I did the Ford commercials. We would do some that were like super creative. We were selling like F-150 trucks and, an idea that all the creative people loved. And then we test it with another idea that was like, get $1,500 cash back. It ends this Sunday. And that one would work better. And you're like, oh, no. But so you still have to account for data and reality and what's working and what's not. I think you start as in a good place instead of just trying to totally, I see brands all the time where they want a different audience that isn't them, or they want to be something that even with, a lot of makeup, they can't pull off. And I think that's still me. It's a glossy shot, but it's still me, and I didn't, it wasn't photoshopped. I don't think it was good lighting, but so I think you start in an authentic place, and then you have to also account for what people are going to buy and what makes them comfortable also. Cause ultimately you're not your own audience. They're the audience.
Oh, it's so true. I like that. Start authentic and then figure out what your audience needs.
And then totally fake it.
Well, that reminds me, and I want to ask you a management question after this because you're talking about managing people can meet on calls. I think you have a distributed team, but it reminds me of my first agency job. I was writing for people who owned like ski and ski out condos in like the Vail Valley, like second, third, fourth homes, like titans of industry and stuff.
Right.
And I remember I had one concept that was, about sleeping in and then going to ski. And my boss was like, you don't understand. These people are up at like 5 a.m. checking the markets in Europe or Asia or whatever. He's like, they're not sleeping in. And it blew my, like coming right out of college. I think I had one class in like all the semesters in college that was before noon. And I was like, why even bother getting that rich if you can't sleep in? So I think that's a great lesson there about like, understand you're like, be authentic, but you're also not your audience or your customer always. And you need to understand that customer and serve them.
Yeah, I actually had a nightmare like a couple days ago on a spot that I did probably 10 years ago where I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I recommended that they go with that idea because it was completely the wrong thing. And you can't just do things that are creative for their own sake, and you can't just be like, this is who we are and screw everyone else. Like you do have to try and make modifications where they're needed.
That is a bit of a delayed reaction. But so you were talking about, I think you have a totally distributed team. You're talking about how they're showing up on Zoom calls and stuff. One lesson you had is don't look at delegating as a task, right? So as we talked about you growing from essentially a solopreneur to now where your agency is, I think delegating would be super important to where you're getting now. So how do you learn this lesson? Don't look at delegating as a task.
Well, I look at it more as a skill than like, oh, you just delegate by you click a couple things in Asana or Monday or Basecamp or whatever. Like it's something that you really need to work on and get better at and improve and get help with and really master if you're going to. And by the way, this is, you'd mentioned before, like, I guess because I'm telling the story of my own business, that like, oh, that's a great advice for a small business. But I think it's great advice even if you're managing a large department or a team within a brand. Like, you still, delegating is so important because it not only empowers other people and helps them, get better and get more fulfillment out of their job, but it gives you time to think about the big issues, so you're not caught up in the minutia. And like I said at the beginning, all those things that frustrate you, I think you have to look at them differently, but you also want to eliminate those things out of your way whenever possible. So delegating is the key to doing all that stuff. And I think, it's probably easier for someone. Let's take it's Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook. You've got this thing that's like this world beater that's getting millions and millions of users. It's easy to build a team. I think that's an easy lesson for him to say it. It's much harder when you're like, okay, well, if I delegate to someone else and they mess things up, like, a lot could go wrong because we're a small company and there aren't a lot of things and we're not getting millions of users regardless of what we do. Like, we mess up one client, we could be like out of business. So it's a little bit like jumping off a high dive. Like, you have to. And there are people who could delegate things, and I did that plenty of times, which made it hard for me. You delegate something, it gets totally screwed up, and then the natural reaction is to, like, I'm not going to delegate. I'm going to do more stuff myself because I can control it and I can make sure. And ultimately, you got to keep jumping off the high dive until it's not as scary, and you get better at jumping off the high dive, and then you can really build an organization. I think that's how we grew from 600 to 600,000 in revenue to 6 million. Was I got out of the way because I was the biggest impediment to the business and the business value even. So it's going to sell hopefully at a much better price the second time, hopefully way down the road.
Yeah, so that, I don't want to overlook that. So that's something great you're mentioning. Maybe you can share one of those failures and what you learned from it. I think you were coached even. And so what you changed from those failures instead of just giving up and saying, I'm not going to delegate. Because, for example, I interviewed David Apple, the chief marketing officer of Intuitive Health, on How I Made It in Marketing. And one of his lessons was make it work. And his point was, so much times in marketing or advertising or business, like we just don't have patience. We just go into, like, something doesn't work,
right.
Boom, boom, boom. We go into the next thing. And I know one thing with your story, I think it's a 19-year overnight success story, right? We've talked about a lot of this growth in the past few years, but you've been at this for a long time. So tell me some of that patience, that stick-to-itiveness, making it work. What was something that maybe didn't work, in the past when you were delegating it? What did you learn from it? And now what are you able to do now because you didn't just give up and say, hey, no, delegating won't work?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'll just give you an example was for our billing process is I used to have to, because that was the financial part, I used to have to approve every invoice before I'd look at every bill when it came in. I'd approve every invoice when it came out. And I actually hired a couple coaches. The first coach I hired was this, he was a 90-year-old Jewish guy who, I'm Jewish. He reminded me actually of my grandfather, which is, I think, the reason I hired him. And also he would call me kid when I was 50 years old. So, like, anyway, I think that was the reason. We had an initial Zoom call and I was like, I love this guy. But he had built two businesses from 0 people to 500 people, sold them both, and just in construction in New Jersey in the 60s. So he was like dealing with mobs, and he was like a tough guy. And he'd be, and I'd tell him about my process of like clicking looking at every invoice and checking and double checking that we had all. And he's like, wow. He's like, how were you at math? I was like, oh, I was a C student. And he's like, and of the 5 years that you've been checking invoices, how many were incorrect? And I was like, maybe like 3. And he's like, why the hell are you doing this, kid? And so things like that. And he's like, we're getting you out. He's like, if you can hire someone that you can trust, you don't need to do that. So find someone that you could trust. And then, so it's all about just finding people that you can trust in every department that can do things. And sure enough, I went back and I did what he said. I let the billing and invoicing and all that stuff go for 6 months, and then went back and checked it. And there wasn't anything I would have changed. I was like, oh my God, that was like several hundred hours I would have spent like combing over billing, and it wouldn't have made any difference. And it was kind of upsetting because I had been doing that at that point for, like 15 years. And it was a great lesson. And then I started doing that with creative tasks and account management tasks and just finding people that I could trust, people with passion. And it started getting me out of different facets of the business. And I still it's a skill. So I still mess up and I stumble and I get in things and we win a new client and I'm way too involved than I should be. But I'm constantly working on it. And, and I have really good people around me now who will kick me out of meetings or tell me to shut up. I mean, when we were in person, they used to actually physically kick me under the table to stop talking. And now we don't have that. But, there's sort of signals on Zoom that we can sometimes do if I'm doing too much. Exactly.
Pull your ear and then get Rich to stop talking. So,
yeah.
No, as you mentioned, that is true for large businesses too. I mean, if you want to grow in a large organization, you better learn how to replace yourself or you're not going to move up that chain of command, right?
Right.
So you were mentioning someone you learned from. The first half of the podcast, we talk about lessons we learned from the things we made. In the second half, we talk about lessons we learned from the people we collaborated with. But first, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. You can get 10,000 marketing experiments working for you with a free trial of the MECLabs AI Guild at meclabs.com/AI. That's MECLABS.com/AI. And you can learn to take advantage of the artificial intelligence revolution. So, as I said, let's talk about some lessons you learned from people you collaborated with. In your last story, you actually used a voice when talking about that person. If you will use a voice now, because that made the story more entertaining for each person you mentioned now. So your next story, your next lesson is let others talk first. Always let them finish their thoughts. Leadership can be more about listening than talking. And you said you learned this from Dave Josseran, the president of ThinkSpark. So how did you learn this from Dave?
So, I'll go back further to I was on an initial, I think it was the first time I went out with my wife and my parents and some siblings, and we were all in the car. And my wife was looking around just she was bewildered because everyone was talking at once and no one was listening to each other. And we came from a loud Jewish family. We're all talking all the time. And also from having I think being a small business, when you are the CFO, the CEO, the COO, you're all these things, you have to talk all the time. And you just get in that habit. And I had to really learn that to stop talking. And so Dave is our president now, and that was part of the delegating process, is realizing, wherever we got in I guess at that point it was probably 17, 18 years, I wasn't the right person to carry it forward with a lot of billing now and a lot of responsibilities. We needed a president who knew what he was doing, and passion is great, but you also have to have some real technical skill in running a larger business. And that's where Dave came in. And so one of his lessons to me, which was great, is, when you're talking, there were so many times where I would start to take over a conversation, and Dave is the client is giving you information, they're guiding, and that second thought of oh yeah, one more thing, they might tell you something about them that'll give you a great insight into their personality or into their brand. And if you're jumping in, you're not allowing that to happen. And so I actually have a Post-it note on my laptop that says, let people finish. And that's been, just because my tendency is to jump in, because I do get excited about things. And sometimes if people are meandering, I know where the sentence is going to end up. So I'm all right, let me finish your sentence and then start my sentence. And that's a terrible thing to do. So I've gotten better at that. I think I've let you finish most of the time. I'm going to work on that if I haven't on the second half of this podcast. But it's a great lesson to do. And sometimes it takes a Post-it note to do that, but it wasn't working out in the way that I was doing it before.
Well, I have seen you chomping at the bit while I'm talking, just to jump in and talk. But no, I have that problem too. I think it's maybe as creatives, we think fast, right?
Yes.
And we're thinking 2 steps ahead, so we want to jump in. So I don't know if you notice on this podcast, when the guest talks, I sit back away from the mic because I want to jump in and interrupt. But so, I'd rather hear you, Rich.
I see, and of course, ironically, I'm interrupting right now. But so someone said to me this was yesterday actually, have you ever thought about taking Adderall? Because I'm so all over the place, and my brain is that's how I make money. It's only from my brain. Like you said, I don't have any technical skills to actually build or fix anything. I'm not a doctor that could do it. This is it in my head. So so I was like, I don't want to mess with the formula at all, because that's, for better or worse, like, it's worked to some degree. And then, actually, this is getting a little off subject. They're like, oh, it just washes out of your body like later that day or whatever. I was like, oh my God, what? So maybe I should. I don't know. I like being hyper. It's who I am. But I'm open to maybe at some point not being as hyper.
No, I think that is a core skill. You gotta have passion, excitement, energy, and you gotta be able to tie a lot of those different things together. So I don't know. You could do an A/B split test, Rich. You could try it for a week and try it not for a week, but I don't know, man.
I think
cautious.
we see a follow-up podcast here of Rich Davis after Adderall and how that worked.
But let's do one on Adderall, like the most boring podcast ever.
Let's see how that goes. Take Adderall and we can live stream it.
It's funny. I was getting an application for someone speaking, and she was speaking so weird on the podcast, I couldn't figure it out. And so they ended up being called. Maybe I shouldn't name it, but it was about software and sours. And that wasn't the exact name. But so basically they talked about software, but they were sucking on sour candies while they did it. I guess it was like a Hot Ones idea or whatever. So
Gotcha.
maybe we could do advertising and Adderall and see if that works out. I think that would be pretty boring though. So this brings up a good question, because you talk about what it means to be a creative. But so you were a creative, then you go into running a business. And so you mentioned a few things. You mentioned like delegating, but like, what did you have to do? Like, how did you have to grow up? What skills did you have to get going from an agency copywriter, which frankly is one really good skill set and really bad at everything else, from socialization to getting your timesheets done to everything. So what did you have to do from going from an agency copywriter to going to actually running, your own company? And let me give you one quick example. I talked to Jonathan Kaufman, the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer of Sage Dental, on how I made it marketing. And one of his lessons was the relationship part and the art part of marketing in business is as important as the data and the financial metrics themselves, right? And so the art part I get, like that's our creative part, but the relationship part, man, like if you're an agency, I'll let the AEs figure it out, right? And the data and the finance, I had data analysts. But then you get your own shop, man, it's you. So I made a run of it for 5 years, but this is where I struggle. I was like, I just want to make things. I don't want to deal with health insurance or these other things. So you persevered 19 years. So what did you do beyond being a creative to be able to run a business? What skills did you pick up?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I guess it's all how you look at it, because I always thought what I loved about marketing is it's the intersection of art and business. And you can't just be, we've all seen the Super Bowl commercials. It's like, oh, we're going to have Morgan Freeman jumping out of a helicopter, and that's great. And you're like, who was it for? I don't know. It was either Doritos or Toyota, or it was, life insurance. I don't remember. And so there's stuff that's creative for its own sake, and maybe that works and maybe it doesn't. But to me, the reason I didn't go into like a fine art of writing novels is I did actually like the business aspect. And I don't know, like, I think there's a lot of creatives who don't like the business part, and there's also plenty of AEs who don't like the creative part. I happen to like both. So to me, it wasn't as crazy a jump. Now, I would do some weird things, like originally when I was, had the business out of like a spare bedroom, I would sometimes even I'd have my creative clothes, which was like a hoodie and ratty jeans, and I'd work on some stuff. And then I'd go take a walk around the block, come back, change my clothes for, to get into business mode, and then go over cash flow projections and things like that, just to be in the sort of in that mode a little bit more. But I don't know, I don't think you can fake that. If you hate business, and that sort of thing, then probably having an agency isn't for you, because most of what I do isn't creative. I still do creative development, especially for big campaigns that I selfishly, we've got a really cool client in the tech healthcare space that I want to do all the work on now, because I'm really excited about that. But but most of what I do is a lot of business things. It's managing relationships, it's personnel, it's staffing. It is a little bit, I'm not really that involved in the finances, but it's still my business. And for key decisions, I have to make a decision on sometimes where we allocate money or approve it. And I need to do my homework. So I don't know. I don't think you can fake it. I just happen to be lucky or unlucky in that I like both of those aspects, and I'm maybe not great at either one, but pretty good at both of them, I guess, to where we've been able to survive.
Well, how did you learn that when you were first getting out in there? Because as I said, like, so I agree with you. Like, as an agency creative, you're not like a pure creative, like doing fine art, but and you do want to have that. A good concept is helping the strategy in a
Right.
creative way, not like you said, just some random commercial of Morgan Freeman. At the same time, when you're working in an agency, some creatives in a good agency, at least, you're kind of ensconced in that creative bubble, and you're really good at one thing. It's coming up with that good concept that helps the
Right.
business. You don't know how
Oh,
everything's getting run and how it's all working. So once you
it's
got out there, how did you get up to speed on some of that
yeah,
stuff?
it's so much. I think the best, the number one advice I would have for people is like throw out when you're starting a business, throw out your 5-year plan, throw out your 3-year plan, like have a 90-day plan and just survive while you're making mistakes. I mean, it's that cliche of failing forward, but that's, I really believe that that's true, is like either you win or you learn something. And man, those early years were so many mistakes and flirting with going out of business several times, especially when the recession hit. Man, it was just like really touch and go. I'll tell you just really quickly. We had, after we got done with payroll one time, this is in, I guess, 2009, we had $5 in the bank account, and I said, I'm going to keep this receipt because it's the smallest amount of money I'm ever going to have, and I'm going to go make something now. And then 2 weeks later, when we ran payroll again, we had $3 in the bank, and that's the receipt that I keep. And it was just a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes, and just learning slowly. And some stuff, took years and years and years. But I really was dogged about just trying to stay with it and improve. And ultimately, when we got our head above water enough, I was able to hire really good people, and those people were the ones. I mean, it was like a hockey stick really towards the end. It was a lot of struggle, and then we're just now reaping the benefits in these last few years and that's taken other people to do that. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. I mean, I think one thing I've heard from listeners is it like when you see people externally succeed, whether it's a CMO or an agency, we are such a shiny industry that we put such a good sheen on stuff that sometimes you don't see the struggle. And so when you're going through the struggle yourself, it's hard. And so I think it is helpful for people to hear others' journeys that like, okay, now you're at, one of the fastest growing companies. I think you said 180% over 3 years or something like that. But it took this time to get there, and it's not just like that out of the gate. So I think hopefully that's helpful to everyone listening, whether they're on the brand side or the agency side.
There was a great lesson I learned. I had a job when I was 16 as a dishwasher, and at a restaurant, and I would watch the total chaos every night in the restaurant when there was a dinner rush. It was an Italian restaurant, the Spaghetti Warehouse. It's no longer there, but and it was just people screaming at each other and stuff getting thrown up. People are thrown out, and people were throwing food at each other when they would get really upset. It was chaos. But then they would hand it to a waitress who would come out with a smile, put down this beautiful meal for people, and at the end of the day, like, they were happy. They'd have a meal, and they had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. And so when I started my business, especially in those years when it was chaos and we were, just had no idea what we were doing, I would think of that restaurant, and that was like my example. It's like, we just got to get the food to come out looking nice, put it down, have the people enjoy their meal and be satisfied. And so now we have the kitchen running a lot better, but the meals have always been good. So that part has worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's the back of the house versus the front of the house. I remember when I was earlier in my career, I got to work with IBM some as a contractor, but so I got to be inside IBM, and big storied company, especially back then. And I was surprised at what a mess it was internally, even a company like that. And I realized at that point, and I think Obama had even mentioned this at one point when he rose from a community organizer to president. He's like, it's always a mess with everyone. He's like, the people in the room change, right? And you maybe get some I don't know, smarter, more accomplished people in the room, but it's always a mess. Everything's a mess internally. Just seems different from the outside.
Yeah, we work with, at the end of the day, it's still people, and sometimes we work with some really big brands at this point, and, they're complicated organizations, and it's always just people and different people with different relationships and different dynamics and those kind of things. And yeah, it's all chaos. So it's getting the stuff on the plate correct. That's really the thing. And some companies can't do that. And that's when you really run into the serious trouble.
Yeah, so that gets back to this lesson. You kind of talked about it some when you talked about selling your agency and buying it back and what you missed. You said solving problems for people is a privilege, not a burden. And you learned this from Elliot Horowitz, the CEO of Physicians Preferred. So how did you learn this from Elliot? Because I think a lot of people listening now, like I mentioned, we got all these problems. It doesn't feel like a privilege right now. It feels like we got to get this stuff done. But kind of taking a step back and realizing that I think would be helpful in everyone's career.
Yeah, so this guy was like a serial entrepreneur and just started businesses all his life. When I started working with him, he was 88 years old, starting a business from scratch, like trying to raise funds, hire employees, get the marketing done. It was a medical malpractice insurance company, and he sold it at 92 for I think $19 million or something like that. It's like an amazing story. And that's just, I basically, he was a client of ours, but he was also like a mentor to me. And I would come in and he was just such a nice guy. He'd always ask how the business was going. He was really fascinated with that part and how I was managing things. And I would, of course, when people, you've got this great mind, I would just start bringing up complaints and things that were irritating. And he's like, well, this is why you're in business, like to solve problems for people. Like this is why you get paid what you do, because you can figure out things other people can't, and stop looking at these as problems. Stop looking at like, why is this happening to me, and say, why is this happening for me? And really, it's an honor to be able to use your brain to help people out of situations, to build your own company, to figure things out so everyone's work life is easier. And basically told me I was looking at things the wrong way. I mean, I had this, same lesson several ways, and that's really played a big role in my philosophy of trying not to focus on the issue as something that's bad, as it's an opportunity. And I know that sounds cliche. And in the moment when you're dealing with stress and pressure and money and personalities, like people don't want to hear it, but you got to take a step back and realize, again, we're all super lucky to be in this industry where we use our intellect and our creative skills and our people skills and solve problems and change the world. Like that's a really cool thing at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I think that is a great lesson really in any job you get to work in. I think it's just a great personal lesson. But let me ask as a brand lesson. Yeah. And I wonder, this is maybe getting a little far afield of the normal agency relationship with brands, but what about, like, have you ever advised, you have any examples when it comes to customer service? Because, and anything you've taught brands about that? Because one thing, when you're saying solving problems for people is a privilege, not a burden, I also think about how brands treat customer service. And to me, it's always been one-to-one marketing, right? But they look at it as a cost center. And so, for example, we did a study with 2,400 Americans. We split them up. Half we asked, hey, tell us about a company you're satisfied with. And half we asked, tell us about a company you're not satisfied with. And this is what we found, that when we asked them, when that company makes a mistake and fails to meet your expectations, how likely are you to follow up with customer service? And what surprised me was only 51% of satisfied customers would follow up with customer service. Only 18% of unsatisfied customers. And now as marketers, you might be like, I don't work in customer service. Again, it's a cost center. But think about, you've already paid the CPA. You've already paid to acquire these customers, right? You want to keep them. You want to have such amazing customer service, like I said, one-to-one marketing, that you want to keep them. And again, a lot of times they don't even want to reach out. So I look at that as, that's a privilege. Customer service is a privilege. If a customer asks for help, that's a privilege. It's not a burden. It's not a cost center.
Yeah.
So anyway, for you, Rich, go ahead. Have you ever consulted with any of your clients about customer service? I know it's kind of far afield of what we do in the front end of the funnel.
Well, it's funny because I had a lot of awful high school jobs. Like I mentioned, I was a dishwasher, but the biggest thing I did was telemarketing. Like I did, I cold called for AT&T back when there was long distance service. So I'm definitely dating myself here, but trying to get people to switch back their long distance. I feel like we need to explain to younger listeners like what long distance service even was, but you used to have to pay for that separately if you called outside of your home city. And, and I was pretty good at it in that they would rank us like on how many people you could switch, and that's actually what sort of got me started into marketing, because I realized that's like the core of market, like that was marketing. I was trying to sell something. So I do think it's really important. I feel like people do think that customer service is like a separate thing from marketing, but it really is important to not just look at it as a chance to, help people, but also to articulate your brand in some way and make it do something that's a little bit different. But it's not what we do on a regular basis, but I do definitely get the value, and that's what I was doing for a long time when it actually like inspired me to go into, in some ways, to go into marketing.
It's funny. I worked in telemarketing too in college, and it was timeshares, and it was really just kind of getting people to show up for the presentation like that. And that's what I get paid on, right? To get paid a lot more and more people show up. And I came to realize they had this speech that they gave me, and it was like first you do the qualification call to make sure they qualify, and then you call back and you're like, oh, you've been selected. They try to make it like you've won a trip to Florida, right? They didn't say won specifically, it said selected, but and so I would do that, and then I'd find out like I didn't get paid if people booked the meeting. I only got paid if they actually went and showed up there. And so I could get people to book the meeting with that, but they wouldn't show up. And so, I got the idea. Let me just be straight with people, right? Because that dialer would just nonstop dial people. This was before can spam. It was a long time ago. It was before like the do not call list. It was back in the days of long distance, like Rich talks about. So what I changed it to is I was just straight with them. I was like, hey, we're a timeshare company. You know how this works. If you want to go to this presentation, you'll get, a free, 3-night trip to Florida. We'll give you a Red Lobster gift card, whatever. You got to go and sit and listen to the sales call. And
is this offer still available?
I'm sure you can find it.
I like Red Lobster.
But yeah, and some people do. But what I found is it worked so much better when I would just separate people and find that right customer that like, yes, that's something I want to do. I want to go and listen to the sales call to get the free thing versus, trying to trick people.
Right. So this is maybe the theme today about like, sort of like that headshot you were talking about. That's sort of like the slightly polished version. I know when I was doing telemarketing, so they hand you a list, and that we were selling, I would work at a company that sold frozen meat. It was called Colorado Prime. So we sold like tons of like chicken and beef and ham and stuff like that. And then they would also like send it so much so quickly you had to buy a freezer at like some crazy rate, like an industrial size freezer. So anyway, so they give me they're doing like whole ham, like giant slabs of ham.
You're the right guy for that too.
Yeah. And on my call list was my rabbi. And I say to my boss, hey, this guy is not going to buy any ham. And he says to me, not with that attitude, he ain't. So I was, so it got me thinking like, yes, you have to be true to yourself and blah, 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 and all that stuff. But at the same time, sometimes some people are never going to buy no matter what your customer service is. And like you said, you have to know your customer and make sure you're marketing the right things to the right people. So that was a good marketing lesson also. I mean, I think telemarketing is such a great way to get into marketing at the most like fundamental level, It was a terrible job, but helpful.
It's a terrible job, and it forces you to have those interactions. But that's a hilarious story. That's hilarious. But it actually brings up this lesson that you had. You can't please everyone, right? I think that's perfect. You can't please your rabbi by trying to sell ham. You can't please everyone. You said you learned it from Benjamin Davis, a student who is your son. So how'd you learn this from Benjamin?
It's really interesting. So my son is on the autism spectrum, which he's very high functioning. He's literally like the smartest person I know. Like he memorized the entire periodic table, I think at age 4. Just a really interesting, super cool, and a loving kid. Like a lot of kids on the spectrum are not very like emotional in that way, and he really is. But one of the things is he's very he has no filter. So if he doesn't like something, he tells you. And I think so much of our in our day-to-day lives we're, oh, that's great, and we have to do that. That's sort of like the social construct. And he'll just say, my wife could make something and he's like, this doesn't taste good, it's very salty, and what I realized, and you can't do that, like I couldn't say that to my wife, I would be kicked out immediately. But he does have like this like it's liberating to sometimes be able to just sort of say what you feel. And so I took from that like a lesson of just we have to like survive in society, and that's a lot of kind of like nodding at things we don't agree with and things like that. But I did take from him the fact that, look, everyone's very different, and we can't make everyone happy. And he just, we know when he's happy and when he's not happy. And sometimes it's okay to articulate that and just have a more honest relationship with people. So I don't know what that has to do specifically with marketing, but it's been a great life lesson for me. And I learned so much from him, not the periodic table, but everything else I've learned from him, which that's been very beneficial.
Well, here's what it has to do with marketing to me is because, again, I think it gets back to a great brand lesson. You can't please everyone is focusing on the ideal customer, right? And so I wonder if you have any examples of working with a client or, brand to focus that value proposition on the ideal customer. Because as I mentioned, that study we did earlier, we separated 2,400 consumers separated into customers that were satisfied, customers that were unsatisfied. And you would expect satisfied customers would buy again more, right? But what we found is that 713% more satisfied customers are very likely to continue purchasing products, which is huge, right? When you think about all the money we're investing on the front end, advertising to get those customers, 713% more. That's massive. And how do you make a customer satisfied? Ultimately, is you come through on a promise, right? And what that means to marketing, what that means to advertising is making the right promise to the right people. Don't try to be everything to everyone. As you said, you can't please everyone, but find that ideal customer and please the heck out of them. So, if you have this, I know like a lot of brands you go into, they want to it's a bank for everyone. Like you said, it's a hospital for everyone or whatever. Have you had this experience with any brands where you've had to be like, let's focus in on this ideal customer?
Yeah. So one thing that's, I don't know if this is the perfect example, but it's one I find pretty interesting is we do work for a local public school system that's one of the largest in the country. And so as a public school, you have to take in every kind of kid, from kids who are struggling academically to those who are accelerating, to kids who are super athletic, to kids who are super artistic. And so you have to be the school to everyone, but you also, if you do that, you can't boil an ocean. So it's really hard to market. So it's been really interesting to find out what messages we give to what different audience groups. A lot of is moms making decisions. I guess the dads are, our research shows the dads are involved, but not nearly as much as the moms when it comes to doing the homework and making the final decision. So it's been really interesting in trying to figure out certain schools that we have limitations. So it's focusing on what there is without trying to promise to be everything to everyone. It's also trying to get people to the right schools and the right system. So it's taken a lot of really complicated digital marketing to do sometimes 40 different messages to 40 different people, 40 different audience groups. But it's important that when we're doing the messaging of kind of, realizing that we have things that maybe a private school, can't offer, and they have some things that we can't offer, but we need to find who our audience is, and the most likely person, we need to get them in the right school. So it's been really interesting because we can find something almost for everyone, but we need to find the right audience for the right kind of school, and for the right parent and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know. It's been interesting for us.
Well, that's a great example. 40 different messages, finding those right segments and then getting that right message to the right person, because the right thing won't work for everyone, right? Those days are behind us. So, Rich, we talked about so many different things about what it means to be a marketer. What are the key qualities of an effective marketer, in your opinion? What are you trying to be? What are you trying to hire?
You're talking about like in terms of staffing the kind of people I'm trying to hire, or the kind of clients we're trying to go after?
I would just say, what are you looking for in a marketer? Yeah, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer? Like, who are you looking to be as a marketer? Who are you looking to hire as marketers? What type of marketers are you looking to work with on the brand side?
Yeah, so I mean, for us as a company where we're very passionate and we lead with our emotions sometimes, we look for clients who are the same way. Because if we had clients, we do represent some law firms, but they're really into their area of the law. I don't think we would work well with people who are just going through the motions. And if your company, your brand is just going through the motions, like, I feel like great marketing doesn't, you don't give anyone a brand, you extract it. So you've got to find some kernel there that's worth promoting and worth marketing. And if you have nothing, like, rework something so you've got something interesting. So it's getting something, again, this is like not pleasing everyone. You don't have to have something that everyone wants to buy. You just need to have a passionate audience about that and really connect with them in a way that's relevant. And so that's how now all that stuff is backed by a lot of data, and we do research, and the stuff that you guys do at Mech Labs, like all that stuff is really important to have the foundation. But then at the end of the day, I think people want to work with someone, and they want marketing that speaks to them and has some life to it and some energy. And so that's what we try and get out there. I guess that's just our general, if I had to put one kind of overall thematic, overarching thing that we're known for and that we look for in our clients and in our team, it's probably that. It's passion, enthusiasm, energy, and just being relentless and going after our audience and getting across the points we want to get across.
Well, thank you, Rich. I could tell your passion from this conversation. I learned a lot from you today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's been super fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks to everyone for listening.
All right, let's go have some Adderall.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.